So here you have the Super Systems load entry system. This system is integrated to work with SSi 9000 controllers as well as Honeywell HC900 controllers. This is a username password protected, so as an operator or an administrator you will have to have a username and password to enter. Once I am entered in, there's a couple things on here that you would see. Number one, on the top right, you will see a list of the furnaces that you might be working with, for example. So you'll have these drop-down list here. That would be your furnace, and if there was a load that was running, you would see the information about the load that's being run in that furnace at this time. You also have a selection on language, and then there's the logout, the help, and the close. The close will simply put this into the background so you can use another application on your desktop. Log out simply gives you an opportunity to log out, so now there's limited functions that operator may be able to perform. They still can view a number of things. So if I log back in, I'm going to log back in with administrative rights just to go through some of the details on what we see here. So you'll see the tabs here where we have new, load, load history, and administration. Again, the new load is if I'm going to start a load associated to a furnace, then I would be entering the information about the shop order or traveler data that is being put into the furnace at that time. Load history provides me with a list of information on historical data about the loads that were previously run on a furnace or on a number of furnaces for a period of time. So I can select a time frame where I might want to see from February 1st to April 12th across all furnaces, and then I can look at the details of those furnaces. And I can also do a number of different search criteria where if I wanted to look up a customer, an order number, a part number, a serial number specifically, I could do a search, and again that's based on the criteria over here for the specific information that I'm looking for. And you'll see that for customer SSi, in this example here, it pulls up the details for when that customer was running different furnaces. Now, when you're looking here, the things that I capture with a new load, which we'll go through when we start a load, is the load ID, the furnace, of course the time in, that's when you actually capture it. Timeouts when it completes the recipe. The start operator, add heat operator, so there's an operator can actually mark a load add heat while it's running. It's something that they can do actually after it's performed as well, just for data purposes, data capture. It does give me program information, and we can capture other additional pieces of information, such as if there was atmosphere run for different types of applications. So you'll see that that is the historical information that you would get on here. So I'm going to just go ahead and refresh the loads. I'm going to look at some specific information on dates. So let's see, we want to refresh. Yeah, refresh the load. So on here, so as I look at the information that's being displayed, I also have an opportunity to display information about trend data or generate load reports. So there's a number of things on here that I can look at. So if I wanted to just take this example here on this load ID 1154, gives the furnace of furnace numbers, or furnace ID 9220, and if I wanted to view the trend, I hit the run button here, and you'll see it pulls up SD recorder. And in here, I have the data that is being displayed for that run. So the start time, that being at 14:15 or 2:15 at the start, and the end time is 16:51, and you'll see that's 4:51 there. So that's the beginning and the end of the load. So the click of the quick click of the button for any one of these, I can see the chart for that. But I also have things like a load report, and I can generate this load report for that load. And I can select which data points I might want on there. Maybe I didn't run load TCs and I don't want to include vacuum level on there as an example. I can deselect those data points. What I can also do is modify the start time and stop time. All this is doing, it's not modifying the time that is captured. It's just on the chart itself. It will show the previous 5 minutes and the 5 minutes post run. So on this example here, I hit the OK button, and what it's going to generate is a load report. So you'll see the trend data, very similar to what we saw with the SD recorder when it was pulled up before, for the furnace, the time in, the time out, the operator, whether there's atmosphere or not, the recipe that was run. And then you have customer information. So that was the customer that was entered, the order number, the part number, the serial number, if necessary to capture, and then the quantity. And then there's approved on there. So there you could do an electronic approval process for capturing that information on here. So that's another example. And then there are a couple other things on here. You can do a load report with tabular data. And then I can do the same thing here. I'll turn these data points off and just look at temperature, set point, and process variable. And now the difference here is that you're not getting the trend data. You're actually getting the data that's associated in tabular format, minute by minute. So you'll see that it goes. Oh, actually, I had that set up so it's every 5 seconds. You can change that. So when you look at your tabular format, you can define what the data interval is, and I had that set to 5 minutes on mine. So it was displaying data every 5 minutes. A couple of the other reports, you have furnace utilization, so across all the furnaces between those periods of time, that's going to give me a summary of the time that the furnaces were running loads. I also have a production report, so that's going to give me a list of all the loads with the associated information on the recipes that were run. Then the production report, that would be specific for a furnace, and then time to heat with tabular data. So there's a number of different reports. Can get into the details of those just a little bit later. So to kind of go back into how you create that, what I would refer to as a bookend, so it's the start and stop of a load. Really, you're going to, when you log in here, you're going to select the furnace that you're going to be running. And this happens to be an example of a vacuum furnace. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and create an entry here. So for this customer, I'm going to have a specific order number that I might enter, and then I could also identify a part number. Now I might have it set up, and this is user defined, whether you want to have serial numbers that have to be captured or not captured. I believe I have it set up as optional at this point, and I can enter additional information such as quantity and weight that goes into that. And here you'll see that serial number is missing. So am I sure I want to leave it empty? I'm going to select yes. So at this time, what I have is the next step is to define a process. Okay. So for a specific group of furnaces, you might have defined processes, and those processes are then linked to recipes. That's part of the administration tab, which I'll get into in just a minute. So under here, for 2163 processes, I'm going to select recipe 1. And these are user-defined. These are stored in a database here on the load entry computer in a SQL database. So if I hit the load recipe, it's going to grab that recipe, display to the operator, and then I do have the opportunity to edit and run once for different parameters. Maybe I wanted to modify soak time or modify something different for that. So here you see that you have on this specific recipe, I have an event output of delay. So basic process related parameters for doing this would be a vacuum cycle where I would be ramping up the temperature. So at this point I can add another entry. So I can add another part if I wanted to. So it does allow for the ability to do that. So if I enter that, another order number, a new part, HGH, no serial number, and of course I can enter the quantity weight associated to that. And now I have two different customers on this load. It could be the same customer with different parts, different serial numbers. So it really just depends on how you have this set up to do the data capture. So once I've completed that task, when I hit the save load and start program, what this does is it actually goes and takes this recipe and pushes it down to the control instrument, and now it runs through the process of running that controller. So it actually pushed it down. This is a 9220 controller where it actually is pushed it into the controller and is running that. And you can see it's very similar to the recipe dialog that you might see on some of the super data screens that we would associate it to. So if at any point if I go from one screen to or from one furnace to another, you'll see that if I can't add another one, I would have to mark that process or mark that recipe complete, or it has to complete on its own. So it's constantly monitoring the instrument using the communications engine behind SuperData, and once that's complete, it will create a record here upon completion of that recipe. So I'll let that kind of run through, and I'll advance through the process and the control instrument. Well, as this is going through, I wanted to come back over here and talk a little bit about the administration tab. So for super users, you would have access to this information here, and with this information here, you can do things like add users, add privileges, define a user as active or inactive, which is in the dialog up here. You also have the opportunity to create your recipes. As I mentioned, recipes can be stored in the SQL database that's part of this load entry, or they can be stored down in the controller. So it's defined, it's user defined. And again, that can be for an HC 900 or an SSi 9000 control, which would be 9220, 9205, 9010, etc. So that's the definition of the recipe management. And then there's a couple things in here as far as options. So I can define things where I might not want to show the serial number upon doing the data entry. I might not want to show the atmosphere upon data entry when I'm creating those loads. So you can turn those off, so that wouldn't be something that the operator would actually be requested. Before I talked about this tabular interval, we had it set to 5. I can change my my default time up here. Again, there's a couple other default parameters when we talk about at heat start, at heat end. And again, these are the options that kind of set the tone of how this is going to be used. So this is something that would be done in advance, up front, prior to using the system. Or if you decided that you wanted to change it as you move forward, this is where you would do that. We have a check for updates, so this would go out, check the internet, see if there are any updates, and those can be performed at that time. Now, when we talk about the recipes, we have an opportunity to define a number of processes, and those processes are an opportunity where you would define recipes associated to those processes, and then you assign those processes to a specific furnace or group of furnaces. So, for example, there's when we go through and define these things, of course, you have your recipes themselves that would be defined here, and then with equipment, let's just take editing the equipment here. I take this V3, which is a SSi 9220. This is just the channel, so it actually is utilizing, like I mentioned, the SSi communication engine, defining the trend, which comes from the SD recorder database, or the SD recorder application, and then you have these processes. So any of the processes that I've created, I can now define as usable, right? So you might have a group of atmosphere type of recipes that would only be used in batch IQ furnaces versus a vacuum recipe. So those are how you can segregate those, or you could even do it based off of other parameters as well. So it really depends on how you define those. But once you define these processes, you'll assign recipes to those processes. Now, so now that I have a relationship between the equipment, which is the furnace, and the processes, the next step would actually be the recipes themselves. And when looking at the recipes, if I wanted to look up 2163, for example, and look at recipe number 1, I can select a revision. So I have complete visibility to all revisions of these recipes, or I can just click on load the latest revision, and that's going to get that specific recipe. So again, that's assigned to a process. Now I can create a new recipe if I wanted to, or I'd say, so I save that last recipe. That might be number revision 4 for that. But now I can go through and create the recipe. This is very similar to the dialog that you might look at or might see in Configurator, which is the product that we use with the 9000 instruments, or actually on the screen itself. So this is one of the areas that you would go through and save or create those recipes. Of course, I can load a recipe and do a save as well. So if you have very similar recipes and you want to just go through and modify specific parts of that, you can do that from there. Then the other thing that we have is the ability to import the recipes from an existing configurator setup. So many people that have the SSi instrumentation use configurator to manage their recipes. This is a perfect example here where I could go through and set up my PC group or set up this system here to actually pull those recipes in from configurator, store them in this database, assign them to a process, which is then associated to a furnace, and now you have access to those from here. So that is some of the setup that you would see when we look at the instrumentation and the relationship between the furnaces and the recipes when you're going through in the administration tab on here. So on this controller, I'm just going to stop the controller or stop the recipe from the controller. It's an activity that can be performed at the furnace or through configurator. Actually, with right permissions, I could actually do it through the dialog on here. So once I go through this, I can stop that recipe, which I perform that action. You'll see the dialog will go away here. And once that recipe gets marked as complete, the load information goes away, and now that becomes part of the historical data that I have on my screen here. So there's my time in at 9:12 and my time out at 9:20. And of course, I can go through and view the trend, edit the information, and go through that process, which is all, again, part of the historical data, having quick access to the information and being able to pull up charts or tabular data to get the proof of process and show that the historical information for those runs.